The sun was slowly setting over the dusty horizon, painting the Texas sky with shades of orange and gold. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and earth across the small, worn-out farm that had once been full of life. Amelia Hayes stood by the old wooden fence, watching the land her father had worked so hard to keep alive. The soil was cracked, the crops were thin, and the animals were few. Every day felt heavier than the one before, and the sound of the wind against the empty barn reminded her that time was running out. Her father, Richard Hayes, had once been a strong and respected man in the small town. He had built the farm with his own hands, dreaming of a future where Amelia would grow up happy and safe. But dreams were fragile in those parts of Texas, and life didn't care much for hope when money was short. Years of drought had taken everything from them, first the crops, then the livestock, and finally the savings. Still, Richard had refused to give up. When things got desperate, he borrowed money from a wealthy rancher named Lucas Thornton. Everyone in town knew Lucas. He was young for the success he had, owning one of the largest ranches in the region. He was known for his fairness in business, but also for being a man who always got what he was owed. People said he had a good heart, but a strong hand. He wasn't someone you wanted to disappoint. At first, Richard promised himself he would repay Lucas quickly. But months passed and the weather didn't change. The crops failed again and his health started to fade. The once strong man began to cough more, sleep less, and worry constantly. Amelia watched him weaken, and her heart broke a little more each day. She worked from dawn till dusk, trying to help with whatever she could, feeding the animals, fixing fences, doing the accounting, but nothing seemed enough. One late afternoon, as the last light faded, Amelia found her father sitting on the porch staring at the ground. His rough hands trembled slightly as he held a small cup of tea. "You should rest, Pa," she said softly, touching his shoulder. He looked up and gave her a weak smile. "I'm just thinking," he said. She didn't have to ask what about. She knew the debt, the farm, their future. That night the air was unusually still. Even the crickets seemed quiet, as if waiting for something. Then in the distance Amelia heard the sound of an engine, a truck rolling slowly down the dirt road that led to their house. Her heart began to beat faster. Few people visited them now. When the headlights appeared through the dust, her father's expression changed. He didn't say a word, but Amelia saw the truth in his eyes. Lucas Thornton had come. The truck stopped in front of the house. The door opened and a tall man stepped out. He was dressed neatly but simply, his boots covered in dust from the long drive. His face was calm, unreadable, and his eyes carried a quiet power that made even the silence feel heavier. He took off his hat as he approached the porch. "Evening, Mr. Hayes," he said politely, his deep voice steady. Richard coughed and stood up slowly. "Evening, Mr. Thornton," he replied, trying to sound strong. Amelia stood by the door, her hands shaking slightly as she watched them. Lucas nodded once, his gaze shifting from the father to the daughter for a moment. "I came to talk about the debt," he said. "It's been a while," Richard sighed. "I know, Lucas, I know I've fallen behind. I never meant to, but things got worse this year." Lucas's expression softened for a brief second, but he didn't speak right away. He looked at the weak man before him, the man who had once been proud and hard-working, and then at Amelia, who stood quietly behind her father. Her clothes were simple, her face tired, but her eyes were filled with quiet strength. "I understand times are hard," Lucas finally said, "but I can't keep waiting forever. You owe me a large sum and there's no sign of repayment." Amelia wanted to speak, to defend her father, but she stayed silent. Her father's pride wouldn't let him beg. He simply nodded. "You're right," Richard said, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't have the money." The silence that followed was unbearable. The wind blew gently through the dry fields, rattling the loose boards of the barn. Amelia felt her stomach twist. She looked at Lucas, expecting anger or disappointment, but instead, there was something else in his eyes. It wasn't cruelty. It was something unreadable, something almost thoughtful. Then Lucas said the words that would change everything. "Then I'll take what's mine." Richard froze. Amelia looked from one man to the other, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. Lucas didn't look at her right away. "Your father made me a promise when he borrowed the money," he said. "If he couldn't repay it, he'd offer something valuable in return. A way to make things right." Amelia's eyes widened as her father's face turned pale. "But what did you promise him?" she whispered. Richard's voice trembled. I told him. I told him you'd go with him if I failed, that he would take care of you. It was the only way to keep the farm from being taken. The words hit Amelia like a storm. She felt dizzy, unable to breathe for a moment. You gave me away? She said in disbelief. Her father's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't like that, sweetheart. I didn't mean it that way. I just wanted you safe in case you couldn't pay. She interrupted, her voice trembling. In case you lost everything? Lucas finally spoke, his tone steady but quiet. Miss Hayes, I never planned to take you by force. Your father only asked that I look after you if things came to this. I'm not here to punish anyone. Amelia's heart was torn between anger and confusion. She looked at Lucas, searching for any sign of cruelty, but found none. His face was calm, his eyes sincere. He wasn't gloating and he wasn't smiling. I'll give you both some time to talk, Lucas said after a pause, but the deal was made. I intend to keep my word. He turned and walked toward his truck, leaving Amelia standing there shaking. Her father sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. I'm sorry, Amelia, he whispered. I thought I was protecting you. Amelia stood silently, tears in her eyes, watching the man in the distance who had just changed her life forever. She didn't know if she hated him or feared him, or if a part of her was simply curious about the man who carried himself with such quiet control. The air around her felt heavy with fate, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. As the truck's engine roared softly in the darkness, Amelia's father reached out and took her hand. Go with him, he said, his voice trembling. He's not a bad man, Amelia. He'll take care of you. You'll have a better life than this. She wanted to refuse, to shout, to run away, but something deep inside her knew he was right. The farm was dying and her father was too weak to save it. She could either stay and watch everything crumble, or step into a future she didn't understand. When Lucas returned to the porch, Amelia looked at him with tearful eyes. He didn't demand or insist. He simply said 3 quiet words that would echo in her heart for years to come. Come with me. The morning sun was still low in the sky when Amelia woke up. Her eyes felt heavy from crying through most of the night. The silence in the small farmhouse felt heavier than usual. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of the curtains, seemed to remind her that today she would leave everything she had ever known. Her heart ached as she looked around her small room, the one she had lived in since childhood. The old wooden dresser, the hand-sewn curtains, the faded photo of her mother on the wall, all of it felt like pieces of herself that she was being forced to leave behind. Downstairs, her father sat quietly at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His face looked tired, lined with guilt and sadness. Amelia stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. Pa, she whispered. He looked up, his eyes red and weary. You don't have to say anything, sweetheart, he said softly. I know what you're thinking. Tears filled her eyes. Why did you make that promise? She asked, her voice shaking. Why me? Richard sighed deeply, his hands trembling. Because I had nothing left, he said. You were the only thing in this world I cared about, and I wanted to make sure you'd be safe if I couldn't protect you anymore. Lucas promised he'd never let harm come to you. I trusted that. Amelia turned away, her throat tight. Safe doesn't mean happy, Pa, she whispered. Safe doesn't mean I belong somewhere else. Before her father could answer, the sound of a truck engine echoed from outside. Amelia froze, her heart pounding. She knew that sound. She didn't need to look to know it was him. Lucas Thornton had come back as he promised. Her father rose slowly from his chair and placed a hand on her shoulder. He's not a bad man, Amelia, he said again, his voice low. Just give him a chance. Sometimes life takes us where we need to go, even if it doesn't make sense at first. Amelia wiped her tears and took a deep breath. She knew arguing wouldn't change anything. Her father's debt was real, and so was the promise he had made. She picked up the small bag she had packed, just a few clothes, her mother's locket, and an old notebook she loved to write in. When she stepped out onto the porch, Lucas was already waiting by his truck. He looked the same as the night before, calm, confident, but not unkind. He removed his hat respectfully when he saw her. Morning, Miss Hayes, he said quietly. Are you ready? Amelia didn't answer right away. She turned back to her father, her eyes full of tears. He tried to smile but failed. Take care of yourself, my girl, he said, pulling her into a hug. She felt the roughness of his hands, the weakness in his arms, and the warmth that had always made her feel safe. When she stepped back, her heart felt like it was breaking in two. Lucas helped her into the truck, his movements gentle but certain. As they drove away, Amelia kept her eyes on the farmhouse through the window until it disappeared behind the hills. She didn't speak for a long time. The road stretched endlessly ahead, and the sound of the tires against gravel filled the silence between them. After a while, Lucas spoke. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his tone calm. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to." Amelia kept her gaze on the horizon. "You took me from my home," she said softly. "What could you possibly say to make that right?" Lucas didn't reply immediately. He seemed to think carefully before speaking. "I didn't take you, Amelia. I gave your father a choice and he made it. I kept my word." She turned to look at him for the first time since they left. "A choice?" He was desperate. "That's not a choice, that's a burden." Lucas met her gaze for a brief moment, his eyes steady. "Maybe you're right," he said simply. "But I intend to make sure that burden doesn't become your punishment." There was something about the way he said it, quiet, sincere, that softened her anger just a little. But she didn't let him see that. She turned her face back to the window and stayed silent for the rest of the drive. When they finally reached the Thornton Ranch, the sun was high, and the land stretched wide and green. Amelia had never seen anything like it. Horses ran freely across open pastures, and workers greeted Lucas respectfully as they passed. The ranch house itself was large but not showy, made of sturdy wood with wide porches and windows that opened toward the fields. Lucas parked the truck and stepped out, then walked around to open her door. "Welcome to Thornton Ranch," he said. "You'll have your own room. You're not a servant here. I want you to understand that." Amelia hesitated before stepping out. Everything around her felt strange, too quiet, too perfect. She followed Lucas into the house, where an older woman greeted them with a warm smile. "This is Mrs. Carter," Lucas said. "She runs the house and makes sure everything stays in order." Mrs. Carter nodded kindly at Amelia. "We've been expecting you, dear," she said. "Your room's ready upstairs?" Amelia murmured a quiet thank you and followed her up the stairs. Her new room was bright, with white curtains and a soft bed that looked untouched. A small window opened toward the wide fields. It was beautiful, but it didn't feel like home. She set her bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped together. Later that evening, Lucas knocked gently on her door. "May I come in?" he asked. Amelia nodded. He stepped inside, keeping a respectful distance. "I wanted to make sure you're settling in," he said. "I don't belong here," she replied quietly. "I belong with my father." Lucas nodded slowly. "I understand how you feel. You'll be able to visit him once things settle down. I'll make sure of it." She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of deception, but found none. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked. "You could have just taken the farm instead of me." Lucas's expression softened. "I didn't want the farm," he said. "Your father didn't deserve to lose it. I just wanted to make sure he had someone looking out for him and for you." His words confused her. "You barely know me," she said. He smiled faintly. "Maybe not yet, but I've known your father for years. He spoke about you often, how strong and kind you were, how you worked harder than anyone he'd ever met. I saw that for myself when I visited. I respect that." Amelia didn't know what to say. No one had spoken to her like that before. Not with pity, but with quiet admiration. The days that followed were slow and strange. Amelia helped around the ranch, mostly tending to the horses and learning the daily routines. She noticed how the workers respected Lucas, not out of fear, but out of loyalty. He treated everyone fairly, never raising his voice, but everyone knew his word was final. Sometimes, when the evenings grew quiet, he would walk with her along the fences. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them began to feel less heavy. She began to see small parts of him that no one in town ever mentioned. His patience, his honesty, the way he looked out for the people who worked for him. Still, a part of her heart remained guarded. Every time she thought about her father, guilt filled her chest. She wrote to him every week, and he always replied with shaky handwriting, telling her he was doing better, that she shouldn't worry. But Amelia knew he missed her as deeply as she missed him. Sometimes, late at night, she would look out the window at the moonlit fields and wonder if her life had just been rewritten without her consent, or if, Somehow, fate was leading her toward something she could not yet understand. And though she would never admit it out loud, every time Lucas spoke to her with quiet kindness or looked at her with that calm steadiness in his eyes, something deep inside her heart began to change, something she wasn't ready to face just yet. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly turned into months on the Thornton Ranch. For Amelia, life was no longer what it used to be. At first, she had felt lost, like a stranger walking in someone else's world. Everything around her was so different from the small, broken farm she had left behind. The air smelled of fresh grass, the horses ran freely in open pastures, and the people around her smiled without carrying the weight of fear or debt. But even though the ranch was full of life, she often felt a quiet emptiness inside. She missed her father's voice, the familiar creak of their old porch, and the simple peace that came with home. Yet each morning, she forced herself to get up and work. Lucas had told her she didn't have to do anything unless she wanted to, but Amelia couldn't bear the thought of sitting idle while others worked. So she began helping around the stables, feeding the horses, brushing their manes, and learning to ride. The ranch workers were kind to her, and soon they started treating her like one of their own. They admired her spirit, how she never complained, and how she worked as hard as any of them. Lucas often came by the stables to check on things, and though he never interfered with her work, his presence always made the air feel different. He would stand by the fence, arms crossed, watching her quietly as she guided one of the horses through the corral. She could feel his gaze on her, steady, calm, but never demanding. He never raised his voice or acted proud of his wealth. He treated everyone with the same respect, whether they were ranch hands or guests. One afternoon, as Amelia struggled to saddle a spirited brown horse named Jasper, Lucas stepped forward to help. "He's stubborn," Lucas said with a small smile. "You have to show him you're not afraid." Amelia wiped the sweat from her forehead and looked at him. "I'm not afraid," she said softly. "Just unsure," Lucas nodded. That's how most people feel before they learn they're stronger than they think. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Amelia felt something shift inside her. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something gentler, something like understanding. For the first time, she saw Lucas not as the man who came to collect a debt, but as someone who carried his own kind of loneliness. Later that day, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields in shades of orange, Lucas invited her to ride with him across the ranch. She hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. As they rode side by side through the open land, the cool wind brushed against her face, and for a moment she felt free. Lucas pointed toward the hills in the distance. "My father built this ranch when I was a boy," he said quietly. "He used to say the land only stays alive if you care for it like family." Amelia glanced at him. "You must have loved him a lot." "I did," Lucas said softly. "He taught me everything. But he also taught me that wealth means nothing if you don't know how to be kind." Amelia looked out over the hills, the grass swaying in the evening breeze. "Then you've learned well," she said. "You could have taken everything from my father, but you didn't." Lucas smiled faintly but didn't answer. There was a sadness in his eyes that Amelia couldn't quite read. As days passed, their conversations became more natural. Sometimes they talked about the past, about her childhood, her father's farm, and his early years building the ranch. Other times they didn't need to talk at all. A quiet understanding grew between them, like a slow fire that gave warmth without burning. Still, Amelia couldn't help but wonder why Lucas had really made that deal with her father. There were moments when she wanted to ask, but the words always stayed trapped in her throat. She didn't want to reopen wounds that were just starting to heal. One morning, Amelia woke up to find Lucas waiting outside with 2 horses saddled. "We're heading to the north pasture," he said. "It's a long ride, but the view is worth it." The ride took hours, and by the time they reached the top of the hill, the whole valley stretched out beneath them. Amelia's breath caught at the sight, the wide fields, the winding river, and the golden light of morning covering everything like a soft blanket. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Lucas looked at her instead of the view. "It is," he said, but his voice carried a deeper meaning. When Amelia turned and met his eyes, she quickly looked away, her cheeks warm. They sat there in silence for a long time. The wind rustled the grass and birds soared across the sky. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Amelia didn't know how to explain what she was feeling. She was grateful for Lucas's kindness, but her heart was still guarded. She didn't want to mistake gratitude for love. That night, As she sat by her window writing in her notebook, she saw Lucas outside near the barn, helping one of the workers fix a broken fence. He didn't act like a man above others. He worked beside them, his shirt dusty and his hands rough. Watching him like that, Amelia realized he wasn't the kind of man people in town gossiped about. He wasn't cold or proud. He was simply someone who had learned to carry responsibility without complaint. As the months continued, their bond deepened quietly. Lucas would often find small ways to make her smile, leaving a flower on her window ledge or making sure her father's letters reached her safely every week. In return, Amelia began to trust him more. She would join him during the early morning rounds, helping him check the fences or count the cattle. Their laughter, though rare at first, started to come easily, but not everyone at the ranch understood their closeness. Some of the workers whispered that she was the girl who came to repay a debt. Amelia heard the rumors, and they hurt her deeply. One day, she found herself crying behind the barn, trying to hide her tears. That's when Lucas found her. He didn't ask what was wrong right away. He simply handed her a handkerchief and sat down beside her on the haystack. "People talk when they don't understand," he said quietly. "Let them. You don't owe them an explanation." Amelia wiped her eyes and looked at him. "But it hurts," she admitted. "They think I'm here because of some deal, because I was traded." Lucas turned to her, his gaze steady and gentle. "You're here because I wanted to make sure you had a chance to live without fear. I never wanted you to feel like something owed. You're free here, Amelia. You always were." His words struck deep into her heart. For the first time, she believed him, not just because of what he said, but because of how he said it. There was no pride in his voice, no demand. Just truth. From that moment, something inside Amelia began to change. She stopped feeling like a guest and started feeling like she belonged. She laughed more, worked harder, and even found joy in the smallest things. The way the horses neighed when she entered the stable, the smell of rain after a long dry spell, the quiet evenings spent talking with Lucas by the fire. One night, while they sat outside watching the stars, Amelia turned to him and said softly, "When you came for the debt, I thought you were my enemy." Lucas looked at her, his expression unreadable. "And now?" he asked. She smiled faintly, her voice trembling just a little. "Now I'm not so sure anymore." He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said enough. It was gentle, warm, and full of a silent promise she could almost feel. For the first time in a long while, Amelia didn't feel like something that had been taken. She felt like someone who had finally been found. And though neither of them spoke the word love, it lingered softly between them, waiting for the right moment to be born. The days on the Thornton ranch were growing warmer as spring approached. Amelia had begun to feel more comfortable in her new life, though a quiet restlessness still lingered in her heart. She worked alongside Lucas, rode the horses, tended the pastures, and learned the rhythms of the ranch. Slowly, the land became familiar, almost like a home. Yet no matter how much she smiled or laughed, a small shadow remained. Questions she could not bring herself to ask, doubts she didn't know how to resolve. One late afternoon, Amelia decided to walk toward the northern fields where the cattle grazed. The sun was low, casting golden light across the pasture. The wind whispered through the tall grass, and for a moment, she felt free from the weight of her worries. She loved the land, the animals, and the quiet life it promised. But the mystery of why Lucas had really come for her lingered in her mind. As she walked, she saw Lucas approaching from the distance. He was carrying a stack of papers, and for a moment Amelia felt her heart tighten. She had learned to trust him, but trust didn't erase curiosity or fear. "Amelia," he said gently as he reached her. "Can we talk for a moment?" She nodded, unable to speak. He handed her the papers, documents regarding her father's debt. Amelia glanced at them and her eyes widened. She hadn't expected to see the details laid out so clearly. Lucas continued, his voice calm and sincere. "I wanted you to see this. Your father's debt has been paid off." "In full." Amelia blinked, her mind racing. "But how?" "I thought this was all because of me." Lucas shook his head. "No, it was never about taking you. I've been quietly helping your father repay the loan. I didn't want to involve you in it, and I didn't want you to feel like you were a prize or a payment. I wanted to protect your family without burdening you." Amelia stared at him, her emotions swirling. Relief, gratitude, and confusion battled within her. She wanted to feel anger for the way she had been sent away, but it was replaced with a deep sense of awe at his honesty and kindness. "All this time, you were helping us?" she whispered. Lucas nodded. "Yes. I couldn't let a man like your father lose everything he worked so hard for, and I couldn't let you grow up in fear or uncertainty. You deserved more than that." Amelia's hands trembled as she held the papers. She felt tears welling in her eyes. She wanted to say something, but words failed her. Lucas reached out gently and touched her hand. "I never wanted you to think I took you from your home. I only wanted to give you a chance to live without worry. And if in the process I became someone important to you, then I consider that a gift, not a debt." For the first time, Amelia allowed herself to truly see him, not as the man who had come to claim a debt, but as someone who had quietly carried her family's burdens with care and respect. She felt a wave of emotions, gratitude, relief, and something tender stirring deep in her heart. Days after that revelation, Amelia began to notice the little things Lucas did that she had once overlooked. How he always made sure she had warm meals, how he noticed when she was tired, and how he encouraged her to rest when she worked too hard. He didn't act like a man in control. He acted like someone who genuinely cared. One evening, as the sun set behind the rolling hills, Lucas invited her to walk along the river that bordered the ranch. The water sparkled in the fading light, and the air smelled fresh and clean. They walked side by side, neither speaking at first. Finally, Amelia spoke. "Lucas, I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do any of this for us. You didn't have to. Be kind." Lucas glanced at her, his eyes soft. "I know I didn't have to, but I wanted to. Your father was a good man, and you deserved someone to look out for you, and I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." Amelia's chest tightened. She wanted to say more, to explain how much this meant to her, but her voice caught. Instead, she leaned against the railing of the small wooden bridge, looking at the water below. Lucas gently touched her shoulder. "Amelia, there's something I've wanted to tell you," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "I didn't take you from your father out of duty. I wanted to be someone you could trust, someone who could keep you safe. And over time I realized I wanted more than that. I wanted to be a part of your life. Not because of a debt, not because of a promise, but because of who you are." Amelia turned to him, her eyes wide. She had sensed the connection growing between them, but hearing him say it aloud made her heart pound. "Lucas, I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "I just wanted you to know the truth. I never wanted you to feel like anything between us was forced or expected. Everything here, everything I've done, it's because I care about you." Amelia felt warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in months, the shadow of doubt lifted. She realized that what she had felt, the quiet comfort, the respect, the little acts of care, was genuine. Lucas's presence was not about obligation. It was about choice, and that made all the difference. The next few weeks passed with a new rhythm. Amelia began to participate more fully in the life of the ranch, learning to ride with skill and confidence, helping Lucas manage the land, and even joining in conversations with the workers without feeling out of place. Their bond grew naturally, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. One day, while helping Lucas check the fences on the far side of the ranch, Amelia noticed a small garden near the edge of the field. It was filled with colorful flowers and herbs. Lucas smiled when he saw her interest. "I planted this for my mother," he said quietly. "She loved flowers. I thought you might like it too." Amelia was touched. "It's beautiful," she said. "Thank you for letting me see it." He shrugged modestly. "It's not much, but it's cared for. Just like this ranch, and maybe like us too." Amelia felt a flutter in her chest. There was something in his words, in the way he looked at her, that made her realize she was no longer just a guest on the ranch. She was becoming a part of it. She was becoming a part of his life, and he a part of hers. As evening fell, Lucas and Amelia walked back toward the ranch house together. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, and the air was warm with the promise of spring. Amelia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. She understood now that Lucas had never claimed her as a debt or a payment. He had chosen to be present, to care, and to protect, and in doing so he had shown her a love that was quiet, patient, and sincere. That night, Amelia wrote in her notebook by the window. She wrote about the ranch, the fields, the horses, and most of all, about Lucas. The man who had come to collect a debt and ended up giving her something far greater. A chance to feel safe, cherished and seen. For the first time in her life, Amelia felt certain of something. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that Lucas's intentions were pure and that their connection was real. And that knowledge brought a warmth to her heart she had never experienced before. She closed her notebook and looked out the window at the stars above the ranch. The world was wide, full of possibilities, and for the first time, she felt like she belonged, not just to the land, not just to the ranch, but to a life that was hers to embrace. And somewhere in the quiet night, she could feel Lucas's presence as a steady, comforting force. She didn't need to see him to know he was watching, caring, and waiting, not because of a promise, not because of a debt, but because he had chosen to love her in the truest sense. The following weeks on the Thornton Ranch felt like a dream slowly unfolding for Amelia. The fear and uncertainty that had haunted her for months began to dissolve, replaced by a growing sense of peace and belonging. She had discovered a rhythm to life here, a gentle balance between work and quiet moments of reflection. The horses, the open fields, and the golden sunsets had become her new home. Yet she still carried thoughts of her father in her heart every day. Her letters to him had grown longer, filled with details of the ranch, the work, and her daily life. Richard Hayes wrote back with shaky handwriting, describing how the farm seemed to breathe again under Amelia's guidance and how grateful he was for Lucas's help. Amelia smiled at each letter, her heart swelling with love for the man who had sacrificed so much to give her a future. She longed to see him, to share her new life with him, and to reassure him that she was happy and safe. One bright morning, Lucas suggested a visit to her father's farm. Amelia felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The farm had changed little, still showing the signs of hardship, but there was hope in the air. Crops were growing more steadily, and the fields looked cared for rather than abandoned. Her father was outside, repairing a fence, and when he saw her approach, his face broke into a wide smile that melted Amelia's heart. "Amelia," he called, his voice strong despite his thin frame. He rushed toward her, wrapping her in a warm embrace. "I can't believe how grown up you've become." Amelia hugged him tightly, feeling the weight of the past months lift from her shoulders. "I've missed you so much, Pa," she whispered. Richard stepped back and looked at Lucas, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you, Lucas. You've done more than I could have ever imagined." Lucas smiled gently. "It was never about thanks," he said. "It was about making sure she had a future." Amelia felt a warmth spread through her chest as she watched the two men exchange a quiet understanding. Her father's approval of Lucas, once a stranger, was a reassurance she had not realized she needed. She realized that the man who had come for a debt had become someone she could trust completely, not out of fear or obligation, but out of genuine care. The day passed with laughter and work. Amelia helped her father check the fences, while Lucas guided her through tasks with patient instructions. There was no tension, no reminders of debts or obligations. It was a day of healing, a day that brought Amelia closer to understanding the depth of Lucas's kindness. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with fiery oranges and soft pinks, Lucas asked Amelia to take a walk with him along the edge of the farm. They strolled side by side in silence at first, letting the wind carry away any lingering doubts. Amelia felt a calm she hadn't experienced in months, a serenity that allowed her to open her heart fully for the first time. "I wanted you to see this," Lucas said quietly, breaking the silence. "Not just the farm, but how your father's hard work is paying off again. You've been a part of this too, Amelia. Without your courage, your willingness to step into the unknown, none of this would have been possible." Amelia looked at him, her eyes misty. "Lucas, I don't even know how to explain what I feel. You didn't take me. You gave me hope, and you gave my father a chance to keep his farm. You've given us more than we could have ever asked for." He reached for her hand, holding it gently but firmly. "I only did what I hoped was right. But along the way, I realized I care for you in a way I can't ignore anymore. Not because of debt, not because of promises, because of who you are." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She had felt this connection growing, but hearing him speak it aloud made it real. "Lucas, she began, but the words faltered. "You don't have to say anything now," he said softly. "Just know that I mean every word." The evening air was calm as they walked back to the farmhouse. the sky now a deep shade of blue. Amelia felt a mix of emotions, gratitude, love, and a sense of safety she hadn't known she could feel. Lucas had become her anchor, steady and unwavering, someone she could rely on in every way. Over the next few weeks, their bond continued to strengthen. Amelia spent more time with Lucas, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. They worked side by side in the fields, rode the horses together, and shared quiet evenings on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. Every moment felt natural, easy, and full of trust. She had learned that love didn't have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes it grew quietly in gestures, words, and moments of shared understanding. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the ranch house, Amelia finally felt ready to speak the words that had been growing in her heart. "Lucas, I've been scared," she admitted. "Scared that we wasn't real. Scared that it was just because of the debt, or because my father asked for it." Lucas reached for her hand, holding it over the warm glow of the fire. "Amelia, I never wanted it to be that way. Everything between us is because of you. Because I see who you are and I care for you. Always have, always will." Tears filled her eyes as she leaned closer. "I care for you too," she whispered. "I think I have for a long time without even realizing it." Their hands entwined, and in that quiet, gentle moment, Amelia felt the last remnants of fear and doubt fall away. She realized that the man who had come for a debt had become the person she wanted to share her life with, the person who made her feel safe, loved, and understood. In the weeks that followed, Amelia and Lucas grew even closer. They shared small routines, laughter, and conversations that stretched late into the night. Amelia visited her father often, bringing news of the ranch and sharing meals with him. Richard Hayes would smile at her happiness, relief shining in his eyes, knowing that his daughter had found someone who genuinely cared for her, not out of duty but out of love. One golden evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Lucas took Amelia to the highest point on the ranch, overlooking the pastures and the winding river below. The sky was painted with fiery colors and the world felt endless. Lucas turned to her, his expression calm but full of emotion. "Amelia Hayes," he said softly, "you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to leave this land, this life, or me. But I want you to stay because you choose to, not because you owe anything. Will you stay with me?" Amelia's eyes filled with tears and she smiled through them. "I'm already home," she whispered. Lucas smiled, relief and joy mixing in his eyes. He took her hand and together they looked out over the land that had brought them together. The fields, the horses, the open sky, they all seemed to celebrate their happiness silently. For Amelia, it was more than a moment. It was a realization that life could bring unexpected gifts, even from situations that seemed impossible at first. The Thornton Ranch, once a place of responsibility and work, had become a place of love, hope, and belonging. Amelia and Lucas built a life together, side by side, respecting each other, cherishing each other, and learning to face the world as partners. The farm her father had nurtured continued to thrive, and he often smiled at the sight of his daughter, knowing that she had found not just safety and prosperity, but happiness. Amelia's journey, from fear and uncertainty to trust and love, had been unexpected, full of challenges and moments of doubt. But in the end, it brought her exactly what she needed: a family renewed, a heart healed, and a love that was chosen freely, built on respect, honesty, and shared dreams. And as the stars appeared one by one over the ranch, Amelia and Lucas stood together on the porch, hands intertwined, knowing that their story, born from a debt, had turned into something far greater, a lifelong partnership and a love that could weather any storm.